In my last PlayStation video, I showcased the world's smallest PS1 I designed, where I transferred all components from a real PS1 to my board. It was a 57-second teaser, and I concluded with introducing the PS1 Redesign Series, and the reception has been incredible. Thank you guys so much for the love and support. But before I jump to the next update, I want to take a step back to share the journey of how I even got here. There's a lot of info to digest, so let's dive in. This is the PS1 Redesign Series, Chapter 1. Welcome to the 90s, where the hype for the first PlayStation was at an all-time high. Sony really revolutionized the gaming scene. The 3D graphics were super impressive for the time. It was my first console and introduced me into what a video game even was. We actually had to go make friends with the kids down the block or the neighbors, and we would get together and it was just a fun time. It really added to the charm of the console. I have so many good memories growing up with the PS1, so I wanted to do something cool with it and relive those memories. The only problem was, I kept pushing the PS1 down the list of projects I was working on. Until an engineer and fellow modder posted about his PS1 project. He literally chopped the motherboard in half, rewired the two halves, folded them together, and it worked. This was the inspiration I needed, so I reached out to him sharing my findings to get the last revision of the PS1 Sony ever made for my own project I had in mind, and he guessed what I was up to. So here is the second to last revision of the PS1. The very last revision is harder to find, but basically the higher the serial number on the console, the later the revision. Briefly going over the anatomy, we have the CPU, CPU RAM, GPU, and the RAM is now integrated making it smaller, sub-CPU, video DAC and oscillator circuit right below, the BIOS, and the SPU, the sound processing chip, which also had the RAM integrated as well to make it smaller. Turning it over, there's nothing on the back, so less to worry about. Now you may have noticed there is a sneaky footprint next to the CPU's RAM, and that's because Sony also reduced the RAM chip to a smaller size, which I happen to have right here, courtesy of AliExpress. Now this is the PSIO, which replaces the CD drive. The original CD drive is bulky and power hungry, both of which clash with this project's end goal. It uses an FPGA and a microcontroller which mimics the CD drive using an SD card. Jumping over to GitHub, someone discovered the PSIO can manually be wired up on the smaller PS1, which previously was considered incompatible. Originally, it used 39 data wires, but I found it actually only needs 18, which I highlighted in pink here. At this point, I started removing components one by one, continuously checking if the console would still boot after every removal, when I found another discovery. This chip that was in the middle before I removed it, the sub-CPU, is actually replaced by the PSIO and is no longer needed. Now that we understand the fundamentals, let's hop over to the microscope. The scope shows all the fine details of every trace and component, at least for this board, since there are only two layers, the top and the bottom, nothing in between. I had to probe every single connection with a multimeter to see what it does and where it goes. I lost count if I'm being honest, but was probably at least a couple thousand connections. To verify even further, I removed all components off the PS1 motherboard and sanded it down to the bare copper so we can see every connection more clearly and unobstructed. This is a process called reverse engineering, where we take something that was engineered, pick it apart so we can understand how it works, and in this case, redesign it to our own liking. As I was probing the PS1, at the same time I was manually recreating the circuit board into a schematic using a PCB design software called KiCad, which is what you're seeing here. At the beginning of creating this project, I didn't think about filming this process since I wasn't even sure if all of this was going to work. I had already completed all the PCB design for the prototype prior to making this video, but zooming in and out here shows you every circuit drawn out. Once the schematic was complete, I then created the board design trace by trace in correspondence to the schematic. In this example, I'm zooming into the video DAC and GPU, showing every trace and via required for that portion of the circuit to function. I'm really simplifying this whole process, but you get the point. And after many hours of hard work, we finally have a digital PCB. The design files are then sent off to be made into a real PCB. Here is the blank custom board before any components are installed, and after all components are installed. The original motherboard was 2 layers, but to get this board this small, I had to redesign it using 4 layers. So previously I mentioned there was a top and bottom layer, now there's 2 internal layers in addition to those top and bottom layers. Now the overall layout is very different on my board. Starting with the CPU, I put the CPU's RAM directly underneath it for easier routing and to save space. The GPU is up top with the DAC right next to it, which is not Sony's original, but converts the 24-bit RGB to VGA. The BIOS is now next to the CPU, and the SPU is right underneath it for maximum space saving. The oscillator circuitry is on the upper right edge, and there's extra space on the upper left for future upgrades. Let's take a quick look at the custom board under the scope and give you a point of view of what I see. Every connection you see, I soldered by hand. It's a little bit of a tedious process, but very rewarding once it all works. I'm not going to hide anything. Here are some flaws I had to fix to get it to work consistently. And that is how I made the world's smallest PS1. Thank you guys for joining me on this journey. I have another update coming very soon, so stay tuned.